And then Jeff said that he was very particular that he'll appear, but as long as he doesn't have to be around or touch animals. And he was like the Animal Planet guy. So it was like, what? And we've had some characters come through for sure. But what was great about taking some of the celebrities around was the fact that they were in awe. It wasn't about them. It was about the awe of being in the White House. It was an awe of taking them on a tour and showing them the burn marks of the War of 1812, or giving them some history of the White House that perhaps they didn't know. And it was one of the few times that it was not about them. They were there as citizens of the United States, and nobody. And then I got a big kick of, the celebrities I did take around. I also said that now you have to greet some of the people who work here. So I would take them around to the old executive office building and just walk in offices so other people could appreciate them. But I had a special guest one day. 41 dropped by my office, and we were talking. And he said, "I'm sorry, I'm taking up too much of your time. You must be busy." And I was like, "What?" And he told me he had to get some souvenirs for his folks back in the office in Texas. He said, "What do I suggest?" I said, "Well, why don't I take you around to some of the gift shops in the old executive office building?" He said, "There are gift shops here?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "When did that happen?" I said, "Sir, they were here when you were here." He goes, "Really?" Well, yeah. So we went over and popped into the mess store. We went into the Air Ops store, and the president bought some trinkets for his staff. And I thought that was kind of cool.
What a fantastic story. And I think that we've got a lot of folks asking questions. And Tracy Young from Dallas here is kind of going to organize all those questions and shoot those to you, if that's okay with you.
Great. Thank you, Terry. We've got one. I'll try to kind of go in order here, although we have already had one of them answered. But I've got one from Bonnie Kate saying, "Brad, you've been calling for election reform for years, so we're getting serious here. Do you think anyone now will listen with all the hoopla this year?"
Well, first of all, big shout out to Bonnie Kate. She was one of our all-stars in correspondence, and we thank her for her hard work. I don't know what's going to happen with campaign finance reform. There are three things I think takeaways from this election, and I've written about them for over 10 years. One is national uniform voting standards that are the same for every state in a federal election only. States and local governments want their own elections to be run their own way, that's fine. But for federal office, it has to be uniform and standardized. It's ridiculous that we have different voting methods and procedures in our 50 states. And I think a uniform voting standard would go a long way to the integrity process and surety of protecting our most sacred constitutional right, and that is the right to vote. Also, campaign finance reform. When individuals or corporations, PACs, can spend more than the candidate themselves, I believe that's a cancer on our democracy. And what's good for Republicans should be good for Democrats. I believe the localization of money is important. If you can't vote for somebody, you shouldn't be able to give money to them. The fact that my congressman is off in California raising money is a travesty, because the Constitution says that congressperson represents a fixed finite group of people in my district, 700 and some thousand. So I think that's important. I also think social media needs regulation and oversight, legislation, perhaps. It's gotten way too important during election cycles in power and control over freedom of speech. So it is my hope that all those things will be solved. It's in everybody's best interest regarding what your political stripes are, but there's a big problem in our country, and it needs our attention.
Great, thank you. Then we got one from David Hill saying, "You mentioned the recount, that was refreshing to hear. I feel like no one knows what that was anymore." This one says, "You mentioned the recount, and that has come up recently with documentaries and stories about Roger Stone. I believe you may have addressed this in an interview, but can you clarify what role he had, if any, in the recount?"
He had none. No. Roger's full of crap. Anybody who's ever known him or seen him knows that. I've said it many times. He had no role in the recount. And those of us who did know that Roger had no role. He's famous for taking credit for things he's never done. The fact is that had he appeared at the recount where any of us were involved, we probably would have thrown him out on his butt. He would have been of no value or help to us. He wasn't a Bush person. He doesn't do it the Bush way. No, he's a man of chaos. He would not have been welcome. He said the motorhome that I had was his motorhome. I can assure you it was not. But that's Roger Stone. He's probably one of the worst political operatives to ever call himself a Republican, sadly.
Thank you. That was very honest. I do kind of wonder just a little bit more about the recount, since I feel like we're kind of going back in time here with that. Tell us a little bit about folks that you decided to dress up beyond Brooks Brothers, but tell us a little bit about the ones that dressed up in other outfits.
Well, we decided that the recount needed to be taken to farce. We weren't dangerous, far from dangerous, but we wanted to do what Democrats at that time were famous for, and that was civil disobedience, something that Republicans avoided. And I think it's an important part of public discourse. And we decided we had nothing to lose. We knew that if the recount continued in Dade County in the expedited fashion that was being done behind closed doors without transparency, that Gore could get ahead. And if Gore got ahead illegitimately, it would change the whole dynamic of the election and the recount. So our mission was to keep it as straight as possible. They organized the Brooks Brothers Rebellion. It wasn't a riot. It was all orchestrated. It was all approved by the officials, that being the sheriff's office. They knew who was in charge. They knew nobody was going to get hurt. And but it was done out of necessity. Now, we had to take it to farce because sometimes you get more with humor than you do with being vitriolic. So we decided to dress Ed Cowling, an advanced person of many years and distinction, up as Gornak to take after Johnny Carson's character on television, where he could divine the answers just by holding an envelope up to his head. And he came out dressed as a Swami, and he held an envelope up to his head and said, Gore. And it was clearly a Bush vote because the envelope said Bush on it. And so every day we had to give the press something to film. We had Jason Recker dressed up as a turkey around Thanksgiving and Sean Miles as a pilgrim. And it said, stuff the turkey, not the ballot box. And it got its point across. It was in newspapers all over the country. And, coming up with the slogan, sore loser man, who let the Chads out, Banana Boat Republic. These things were funny, but they also had a very serious meaning. And we found that sometimes the best way to communicate was using a little humor. And I think it was effective.
Thanks, Tracy. Do you have any more from the chat?
I don't think we have any more in the chat, no.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for reminiscing back to the early days of 43, but we also were with you in 41. Can you tell us maybe is there one thing in all of your history that you remember as maybe the most outstanding, outrageous, momentous? Is there even possible to pick one?
It's hard to, of course, from a historic perspective, is 9/11. Being there at that time was just an amazing time in our country. And on the lighter side, of course, some of the antics that went on that nobody ever knew about were just hysterical. And some of that, of course, will be in the book, because people need to know that, there's a lot of humor in politics, although we don't see a lot of it today. And some of the things that happen are just, outrageous, but they occur. Of course, one of the best nights ever was when the Supreme Court ruled in our favor. One of the most trying times with Gordon James and others, and Andrew Shefferdini and so many others, and of course General Rosenker at the election night in Austin. It's probably the biggest press platform ever built, 5 stories high. We nicknamed it the BFP, the Big Effin' Press Platform. And we even christened it with a bottle of cold duck. and it was a long night. And Andrew Shefferdini can attest to the fact that in our trailer that night behind the stage, we had election politics being talked about with Bo Derek and with Wayne Newton. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
We do have another question that's come in from Kevin Sullivan. Said he would like to hear Brad's stories from his time as a technical advisor on Commander in Chief, and then he said he might have been one of the few people that watched it.
You know, I thought it was a very interesting show. Matter of fact, when we went out to the opening of the Air Force One exhibit at the Reagan Library, I visited the set, and General Rosenkerr came with me, and Heather Rosenkerr, and we actually spent the day on the set, and it was really neat. But what we tried to do is make it as real as possible in offering my advice as to what really occurs and what doesn't occur. Of course, what really occurs in the White House doesn't necessarily make the best television. When I took some of the executives from West Wing television show around the West Wing, of course, everything in the Bush White House was quiet and orderly and respectful. Nobody running around. Our hair wasn't on fire. But that doesn't make good television. But we tried to at least, give the advice of what would happen in the West Wing, what wouldn't happen. But of course, with theatrical license, sometimes they take your advice, sometimes they don't.
We've got one from another Kevin Kellums. Hi there. Tell us a fun story about 43 that we likely have not heard, one that offers a window into his personality and character.
It involves underwear and General Mark Rosenkerr. The Jews always got picked to go to Beeville, Texas for the hunting trip with 41 because we wanted Christmas to be celebrated by our Christmas advance people. So the wise men, as we call them, all the Jewish guys went down to Beeville, Texas. And when Mark Rosenkerr was down there, the president was complaining that it was cold and all his buddies had long underwear and he didn't. So Mark was sent out to the local Walmart to buy underwear for the president. So Mark went out to Walmart. It's probably the first time Mark Rosenkerr had ever been in a Walmart. And he's trying to select underwear for the president. And of course, when you're buying underwear for the president, you want to get the best underwear, right? So his underwear cost like $26. It was ski underwear. It was really good, as opposed to the $3.99 underwear. So he went out to give it to the president. And the president says, Mark, how much do I owe you? And he goes, well, sir, with taxes, like $27. The president, $27? Didn't they have anything? And Mark became an underwear salesman to the president, trying to sell him on this great underwear. And then the next day, the president had to thank Mark because he said that he was very warm while the others were not quite as warm as he was. And he wrote Mark a check for the underwear. And to this day, I think Heather has the check. Mark never cashed the check.
That's awesome. That probably was good underwear. We've got one from Julie Branson here from Dallas. She said, I joined the administration as a speechwriter for Secretary Mineta, the only D in the cabinet. Friends don't believe me now that a Republican would do that. Do you have any stories of bipartisanship that we could learn from today?
Yeah, I mean, President Bush 43 had a standing meeting with the leadership of the House and the Senate, bipartisan. It was a standard weekly meeting, and it was smart because it kept a dialogue going. And some days, you had important things on the agenda, and some days you did not. But the meetings continued to keep that dialogue going. And I think it was so important. It's a missed opportunity not to have regular dialogue with your opposition. And it holds their feet to the fire. It sometimes forces dialogue. Sometimes it enhances dialogue. But I think that's a lot of what we're missing today. Is it takes three to tango in Washington, as we all know, at the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch. And I think there's a lot lost by not engaging and not being civil. 43 and 41 were always civil to the opposition. We gave great respect to those who visited the White House, and even at times when we would travel the president and legislative affairs would invite Democrats on the plane, and Democrats, of course, in the motorcade and to our events. Again, another smart move. It's the right thing to do. These people represent the country just like we did, and through our president and vice president. So I was never more proud of the lack of spite and vindictiveness and one-upsmanship. We didn't experience that I didn't see it in 41, and I didn't see it in 43. And I remember one time we went to the Bogey Busters golf tournament in Ohio with 41, and Tip O'Neill, the speaker, was our guest, and he couldn't have been nicer, and we couldn't have been more respectful, as we should have been. And I remember he left his wallet in the locker room, and the president waited for him to go get it, and sent people to assist him. And it was just a respectful atmosphere, which I think is missing. My business partner happens to be a Democrat, David, good friend, who I met debating on television. And we said, you know what? We get along, we like each other, we knock the crap out of each other on TV, but we're friends. Let's make money doing this. And we did.
Tracy, how are we on? Are we done in the chat?
Oh, we are. I do actually have a question for you, Brad. Just you talked a little bit about being able to take the agent's family up to the greeter line. Are there other stories you can think about? I'm sure there's a million of them, but is there one in particular that stands out to you of just giving that one opportunity for somebody to actually meet the president and sort of fulfill their lifelong dream, so to speak?
Well, I went when I understood that my nephew's name was chiseled in the police memorial here in Washington. On my lunch hour, I went down to take a look at it. And as I was looking at his name, I noticed two gentlemen on the other side of the memorial etching names into the memorial. And they were in overalls, and they had their equipment out. And I walked up to them and I said, "Hey guys," I said, "how many names have you done on this wall?" And there were two of them, and the two responded, "We've done every name on this wall." And I said, "Well, then you did my nephew's name." He said, "Yep, if it's there, we did it." And I engaged them in conversation. And then I said to them, I said, "Have you guys ever been to the White House?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, here's my card." I introduced myself. I said, "Today, when you get off, I would appreciate it if you'd come and pay me a visit in the White House." And I took their names, date of birth, social security numbers. And they said they didn't have a change of clothes. I said, no, please come as you are. And, I'd like to have you at the White House. So later on that day, they came to the White House after work. I told Andy Card about it. And I asked Andy if he would have time to greet them. And he said, of course. And I gave them a tour of the White House. I gave them some trinkets and took them up to see the chief. And Andy received them and took pictures with them. And it was things like that the best day for me was giving back and giving other people the experiences that we had. And I never took it for granted. And the best time I had was sharing it with other people. So anytime that I could share my experience, I would do that. And that's one that comes to mind.
Well, Brad, I wasn't expecting my heart to be up in my throat when you finished. But thank you so much for your service and the service of your nephew. I think a lot of us are just like you are, that being able to share that experience with our family and our relatives was very, very important. And so I'm sorry, I'm tearing up, but I'm so glad that you brought that up for everybody. But thank you so much. We wish you the best in your book, working on your book. So please come back in a year or so when that is finished, and we'll be watching you on all your commentating as well as your articles. And what is it? You have it on Fox News and US News. We'll be watching and reading you there. So you're welcome to finish up with us while we're doing our housekeeping, or you can, it's probably getting late there, you can go. But what I'm going to do real quick is put up a poll that people can answer so we can see where people are from, where they worked when they were in the administration. So we would appreciate that. And in the meantime, time, we're going to tell you all about the upcoming events that we have. In March, we'll be welcoming former Air Force One Commander, Colonel Mark Tillman. That'll be Tuesday, March the 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern. Roger, how about you? You might have to unmute yourself, but Roger, how about April?
Hello, everybody from Tampa. And we are honored to have on April 14th, Chief of Staff Andy Card.
And again, that'll be 7 p.m. Eastern. And Julie Branson, May.
Yeah, we're gonna have Dana Perino coming in May 18th, 7 p.m. Eastern, to talk about the after the first 100 days of the Biden administration and kind of compare it to other administrations. Her book is out right now. She's doing a tour. I had to look up exactly what it's called. Everything Will Be Okay, which is, yeah, everything will be okay, but it's life lessons for young women from a former young woman, but nothing more appropriate title than that right now, especially here in Texas. I need someone to tell me that, so.
It's really correct for the time, that's for sure. And we really appreciate everybody joining us today. If you have suggestions for speakers, we would really like to know who you want us to invite, or if you are someone that would want to be one of our speakers, please let us know. Reach out to one of the chapter coordinators. If you don't have a chapter in your town, please reach out to Kevin Sullivan so that we can get you active in your community. And we're getting close to 5 o'clock. So unless anyone has any other questions, we'll say good night and thanks to Brad once again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.